It's a strange pattern you see in many workplaces. A project is clearly struggling, yet instead of being shut down, it gets more funding, more resources, and a bigger team. It almost seems like the worse it performs, the harder it is to stop. And that really makes you wonder about how these decisions are actually being made.
So, picture this. First, a project starts falling behind its deadlines. That's usually the initial sign that something isn't right.
Then, word comes down that it's also over budget. So now the problems are starting to stack up. You've got both time and money issues.
And finally, some new data comes in, and it suggests that the whole thing might not even achieve its original goals. From a purely logical standpoint, this should probably be the end of the line.
But that brings us to the core question, doesn't it? Why, in the face of all this evidence, do organizations so often respond by pouring even more resources into it?
Well, to understand why, we have to look at the powerful forces that can turn a struggling project into one that just won't stop. These dynamics drive a deep sense of commitment, even when all the signs are pointing to a different path.
It really starts with the weight of that initial investment. See, the decisions that were made in the past have this incredible influence over the decisions we make today about the future.
This brings us to the idea of an unrecoverable investment. We're talking about all the resources, the time, the money, the effort that have already been spent and, crucially, can't be gotten back.
And here's the thing. These past, unrecoverable costs start to play a huge role in what happens next. The focus can shift away from what the best outcome is for the future and instead turn backwards to what's already been spent.
You can actually map out how this commitment forms. It starts with an initial decision. Then, a significant amount of resources gets invested. The critical moment is when those resources become fixed costs. They're in the past now, and that's when you see that subtle but powerful shift in focus, away from future goals and toward justifying the past investment.
Once that initial commitment is made, it creates a whole new kind of pressure inside the organization. The pressure to justify. There's this powerful, often unspoken, need to prove that the original decision was the right one all along.
And a big reason for this is that decision makers are very often evaluated on how consistent they appear. Sticking with a plan, seeing it through, is frequently seen as a sign of strong and stable leadership.
These forces are really coming from two directions. On one hand, you've got pressure from within, a personal desire to prove that your initial choice was correct, mixed with a real sense of responsibility for the project's success. But then you also have pressure from others, that external need to look consistent and decisive, and of course, the goal of keeping up team morale and public confidence.
And it all leads to this core dynamic. In many company cultures, changing course isn't viewed as a smart response to new information. Instead, it can be seen as a public admission that you made a mistake earlier on.
But this isn't just about the individuals making the calls. The organization as a whole can build up its own momentum. The system can be set up in a way that just naturally resists changing direction.
You see, large organizations tend to develop a kind of built-in inertia. The bigger the organization, the more energy it takes to change its course. It's a lot like trying to steer a massive ship.
This inertia shows up as very real, structural barriers. For instance, a big project can become part of the company's public identity. Internally, bad news about a project can travel very slowly or get filtered as it goes up the chain of command. You also have different departments that might have a vested interest in seeing the project continue because their budgets are tied to it. And finally, most existing processes are designed to push projects toward completion, not to evaluate whether they should be stopped.
So, because of all this inertia, just continuing with the project becomes the default path. It actually takes less organizational effort to keep going than it does to put on the brakes.
Now, when you take all of these elements, the initial investment, the pressure to justify it, and the organization's own momentum, they combine to create a powerful cycle. It's a cycle where small commitments can escalate into very, very large ones. What you get is a self-reinforcing loop. Each decision to continue makes the next decision to continue even more likely.
And the cycle usually works like this. First, some negative results start to surface. This, in turn, increases the pressure on everyone to justify the actions taken so far. In response, what often happens is that more resources get invested to try and save the project. But that action just deepens the total commitment, which makes the project even harder to stop in the future.
In the end, what this reveals is something fundamental about how these systems can operate. The structure isn't always designed to stop and reevaluate. Often, it's designed, even if unintentionally, to validate its own past commitments.